One of the most satisfying things you can learn as a bicycle mechanic is how to build bicycle wheels. I've taught building bicycle wheels in bicycle shops, and I taught it at a university bicycle mechanics course, and I've learned that just about anybody can learn how to build a bicycle wheel. It's not that difficult if you have a little patience and you can follow a few steps, basic steps. So I wanted to show you how it's done. I think even if you're viewing this on a small screen like on a phone, you'll be able to see that I'm actually building this wheel with used components, used hub, used rim, used spoke. That's because I took apart an old wheel to get those parts. I did that because I've got a lot of these used parts on hand. And also because I think it's going to be easier for the camera to pick up silver on silver. A lot of modern wheels, carbon wheels, you have black rim, black nipple, black spokes, black hub. Things tend to blend into each other and disappear, and you can't see it as well. And when you're lacing the wheel, you have to be paying attention to where you're putting the spokes because you're trying to put them in the right place. The pattern has to match for each set of spokes you put in. I think it's going to be easier to show you that on the video with the silver rim and silver parts. So I chose a used wheel, and that's what we're going to work with. But speaking of used wheels, if you can get a used wheel, it's not too hard to find one. You can pick them up at Goodwill stores. Some bike shops might have wheels that they're throwing away that they would give you, or a friend might have an old wheel, or you can find them at flea markets and so on. But if you have a used wheel, you can take that wheel and use it to learn to build wheels. You can study the wheel as it is when you get it to learn the pattern and look at it, think about it. And then you can take it apart and all the parts will fit for putting it back together again. You'll have the right spokes to use, the right nipples to use, you'll have the right rim, and you'll have a hub, and they all work. So when you take it apart and you put it back together again, you're not going to run into any difficulties, and you don't have to source certain spokes, rims, and hubs as you do when you build a custom wheel from scratch. So that's a good way to go, and especially good for beginners who haven't built a wheel before. To put the spokes in and build a bicycle wheel, you mostly use your hands and a few simple tools. You'll see that I'm going to use a little tool to feed the nipples in, but you could make your own tool out of a spare spoke. But mostly you use your hand. I also have a nipple driver which spins the nipple in, which is a cool tool by Bicycle Research. And Park Tool makes one. But you'll also need the rim you want to use, the hub you want to use, and the spokes that fit the wheel you're building. You have to get the right length. Well, once you have the right length spokes, the hub, and the rim, you can put it together in about 15 minutes with a little practice. And I'm going to show you the process of what they call lacing, which is putting the spokes inside and turning these parts into a wheel. If you're lacing a tall, hollow rim, it's pretty easy to make the mistake of dropping a nipple inside the rim, and then it can be hard to get out. You have to shake the wheel until the nipple falls out of the valve hole. To prevent this, you can use one of the tools shown. I use EVT's mole finger. You can see it at the top. But a scribe or awl or spoke works just fine for this too. I'm showing you how to build the most common type of bicycle wheel, which is called a cross spoke wheel because the spokes cross each other. Once you know how to do this pattern, how to lace a wheel like this, build a wheel like this, it'll help you because you can build any kind of wheel you want to build. If you want to build a small wheel for a portable bike, like these little 17-inch wheels, or if you wanted to build a wheel for a high wheel, an antique bike, those wheels use cross spoke lacing just like modern road bike wheels and mountain bike wheels. Once you know how to build a wheel like this, you can build wheels for almost any bicycle. All right, we're almost ready to start lacing up the wheel, but I want to explain some very simple wheel building math. Nothing too complicated, but when you look at cross spoke wheels, you see all the spokes going every which way, it can be a little confusing to try to figure it out. But it's a simple pattern. All bicycle wheels, this type of bicycle wheel that we're going to build, has 4 sets of spokes. So I'm going to show you, it's going to be a 28 spoke wheel. So there's 4 sets of spokes. You divide by 4, you get 7 in each set of spokes. So what I've done here to show you is I've started with 7 spokes in here just to show you. You can see individual spokes. It's not so complicated when you look at it like this. All we're going to do next is put in another 7 on this side. Then we'll flip the wheel over and we'll complete the other side. 7, 7, 7, and 7. Now, if you had a 32 spokes in a wheel, it'd be 4 sets of 8, right? 36 spoke wheel, 4 sets of 9, and so on. So that's the basic math in building a bicycle wheel. And it's something that will make total sense as we proceed and I show you. So I want to show you 5 basic tips for successful wheel building. You want to set aside about an hour for your first wheel build. It's important to focus on what you're doing. You don't want distractions that can interrupt you. Have fun with it. Don't get frustrated and annoyed or get in a hurry. Just enjoy the process. And if you make a mistake, you can always rewind the video, look at what the video shows and what you did wrong. You can fix the mistake and you can continue. Also, I reply to almost every comment, so if you have a question, you can leave a comment for me and I'll reply back. The first step in building the bicycle wheel is putting 1 spoke in the hub and then putting that spoke in the rim. Now there's lots of different types of rims and I don't know what type of rim you're working with. If you're not sure what type rim you have, we're going to go over it here. I recommend going on the internet to the website of the company, the Major Rim, and looking for instructions, technical specifications on your rim, because it'll tell you what you have and it'll tell you how it's recommended to be spoked, to be laced up. And once you have the directions, it's easy to follow them. Follow the pattern that I'm going to show you here. Basically there's 2 rim types out there today. One is just a standard rim. By standard rim it means that the holes, the pattern of the holes in the rim run around the center of the rim. That's one type, very common. The other type that's pretty common today because they're used on bikes with disc brakes is an offset rim type, and that basically means the spoke pattern is offset to one side of the rim. That's so that the offset side, it basically offsets the holes to equalize the tension in the rim so you can build a stronger disc wheel. So those are the 2 types of rims that are out there. So if you have an offset rim, you start it a little different than if you have a standard rim. The other thing is that the spoke hole patterns, there's basically 2 types of patterns. The one we're working with is what's called an alternating pattern. One spoke hole is on one side of the rim, the other spoke hole is on the other side of the rim. There's also a non-alternating pattern, non-alternating holes, and on that one the holes run the same all the way down the rim, all the way around. They don't stagger, one to one side, one to the other side. So figure out what you have before you start, and then you'll know where to put that first spoke. And I'll show you when we put the spoke in how I figured out on this rim. To prepare the spokes for lacing the wheel, it's a good idea to put some oil, about the consistency of automobile motor oil, on the outside of the nipples and on the spoke threads. By doing this, you'll prevent the nipples from binding in the rim when you're truing the wheel and lacing the wheel, and you'll also make sure that when you tighten the spokes you can get them tight enough. Also, the lubrication on the threads on the spokes will allow you to true the wheel down the road and not have to deal with corrosion even 5 or 8 years after you built the wheel. The first step is placing the rim flat on a workbench with the valve hole opposite you. We're working with a standard rim with the alternating hole pattern. If you're working with offset rims, here's how they are oriented to begin lacing. Now begin lacing by inserting one of the correct length spokes into any hole in the rear hub's cassette drive side flange. You can put it in as shown, what's called head out, or the other way, which is called head in. Looking at the two rim holes on either side of the valve hole, determine which is offset toward the top. Push the spoke end into that hole and thread on a nipple. On rims with centered rim holes, the spoke can be placed on either hole next to the valve. In the same direction you installed the first spoke, place the rest of that set of spokes into the hub, using every other hole on that side of the hub. Now, one at a time, place these spokes into every fifth rim hole, counting from spoke to spoke, and add nipples. Try to turn the nipples onto the spokes about the same amount. Make sure none are barely tightened or else they'll fall off. When you're done, you should have a hub and rim joined by 7 spokes for 28 spoke wheels and 8 spokes if you're working on a 32 spoke wheel. You must have parallel spokes at the valve to provide clearance for pump heads. For this, you twist the hub to wind the spokes in the proper direction before adding the second set. Determine which way to twist them from the location of the spoke nearest the valve hole. If it's on the left, twist the hub to the left, counterclockwise. If it's on the right, twist to the right. Push the first spoke of the second set through any open hub hole right next to the other spokes, but push it in from the opposite direction. Keeping the hub twisted, lace the spoke over the first 2 spokes already in the rim and under the third. Then put it in the open rim hole that's centered between the 2 spokes on either side. If you haven't already, by this point you'll want to feed and turn the rest of the nipples from outside the rim with one of the tools I showed earlier. Finish lacing the first side of the wheel by placing the remaining 6 spokes for 28 spoke wheels or 7 for 32 spoke wheels through the hub, interlacing them and adding nipples. Be sure not to actually tighten any nipples or else it can make lacing the rest of the wheel more difficult. Just thread them on enough that they can't fall off. New spokes can fit tightly in a new hub. They need to be seated or bedded in, or else they can have a bow in them that makes finishing the wheel much harder. You want them to lay flat. To seat the spokes in the hub, you can press down on the heads in one with the palm of your hand, or tap on them near the hub with a soft mallet to seat and flatten them. The next spoke's position is trickiest to locate, and it's important to get it right. Here's my top trick to do that every time. Start by putting the wheel on the bench with the lace side down. Find the spoke that's in the second hole to the left of the valve hole. Down close to the hub, put a piece of tape on that spoke to mark it. Looking through the open hub holes, you'll see that they are offset from the ones with spokes in them. The hole you want to put the spoke in is the one that is just ahead of the spoke you marked with tape. The spoke in the photo here is in the correct hole. Notice how its end is just ahead of the taped spoke. Now that you know what hole to put the spoke in, you can put it into the hub. Angle it slightly so it will fit through the spokes on the other side. Now pull the spoke up, put it in the rim hole to the left of the valve hole, and thread on a nipple. You now have parallel spokes at the valve stem. Add the next 6 or 7 spokes of the third set of spokes, filling every other hub hole. Start with the spoke next to the first one you put in and place it into the 5th rim hole, counting from that first spoke. Screw on a nipple. Repeat this process until the whole third set is in place in the wheel. Finish lacing the wheel by installing the last 7 or 8 spokes. Put them through the hub in the opposite direction of the set you just installed. They go into the hub easiest if you push them through the spokes so that they are aimed as straight as possible at their hole. Once they're in the hub, lace them to the remaining rim holes, being sure to interlace them, passing each one over two and under one spoke. As you lace the final few spokes, feel proud that you now possess the knowledge and skill to assemble one of the lightest, strongest, most beautiful, and most fun objects in the world. As a last step, give your work of art a final once-over and appreciate that you have parallel spokes at the valve stem and interlaced spokes. Just like you did earlier, hit the final spokes to flatten them. That takes care of the spokes with the bend here, the head down spokes. But you want to also pull up the spokes with the heads up, which are on the inside. What you're trying to do is get all the spokes, all the bend out of the spokes, because you want the spokes to all be the same, which helps when you're truing and tensioning, and also takes any stress from being built left inside the spokes in the wheel, which affects it when you're truing and tensioning. Another trick you can use is you take a little screwdriver and you slip it underneath the heads up spoke, and that leaves it on top of the heads down spoke. And if you push down, you'll both pull up this spoke and flatten that spoke, seating the spoke bend and pulling the head of the spoke into the rim and bedding the spoke in. Another good thing to do is to get the nipples seated in the rim, pulling them in. And to do that, you grab parallel pairs of spokes. So I'll grab this parallel pair here, I'll grab this parallel pair here, and I'll squeeze them towards each other. That pulls the nipple into the rim. It also helps seat the spokes. See how the spokes get bent a little bit? Those two processes will help make it easier to true and tension the wheel, because the spokes will all be the same length, or closer to the same length, because you've taken the bend out and seated them all. When we started lacing, I said to turn the nipple onto the spoke about 4 turns. So if you were perfect, you could do that, but nobody's perfect. And what tends to happen is, as you can see, you get some that are threaded down further than others. So the first step in truing and tensioning the wheel and rounding the wheel is to set all the nipples at the same height on the spoke, because the nipples are what are holding on to the rim. And if you get the nipples all at about the same height, you're going to start with the wheel a little rounder and a little truer than if you start with them all at a different height. So to do that is pretty easy if you have some basic tools. You can either use a screwdriver. These are slotted nipples, and with slotted nipples you can use a screwdriver which fits in the slot. Or if you have one, like I mentioned before, you can use a nipple driver, which is a little tool that lets you spin the spoke in more quickly. I'll show you how that works. You just place it in the slot in the nipple. You spin the tool and you watch. And when each nipple, let's say you decide that you want to go down, I mean, I would go down to maybe to expose 2 millimeters and stop there. You can do the same with a screwdriver. All this does is make it a little faster. Now there are some nipples that aren't slotted but have a square head on the inside. These tools won't work for that, but if you use something like Park's square drive nipple screwdriver, it has a square end that fits on the square drive nipples, and you can do the same thing with this. Well, I hope you liked lacing the wheel. It's a fun process, and as much as lacing is fun, I think you'll find truing and finishing the wheel, tensioning the spokes, and getting it ready to ride equally fun, if not more fun. But you want to check your wheel one more time before you start truing and tensioning. Make sure that you have at the valve stem, you came out with parallel spokes at the valve stem. And then go around the wheel and look at each place that the final cross occurs on the spokes, and make sure that at every cross the spoke is interlaced under 2 others, over the third if it's cross 3, or the second if it's cross 2. So you just go around and check on both sides. If you find one that isn't crossed, just loosen the nipple, take the spoke and put it under or over, depending on which side, what needs to happen. So then to true the wheel, you're going to need a spoke wrench. Most of the wheels today, most of the spokes and nipples you buy are going to use Park's black spoke wrench, but regardless of what brand made the spoke wrench, you're going to just want to make sure it's a tight fit on the nipple. You don't want any looseness. So if you have an old spoke wrench, you're not sure what size it is, try it on the spoke and make sure it's a good fit. The process of truing and tensioning a wheel, making it round, making it tight, and making it laterally straight side to side is a trial and error process. Even the best wheel builders in the world are doing it by trial and error. They have a lot of experience because they've done it many times, but they still make small adjustments and keep trying little by little to bring the wheel into true. Most of the time, the turns that you're making on the nipples to true the wheel and round the wheel are approximately a half a turn. Almost never would you crank the nipple many turns. A little bit is all it takes. There's 2 mistakes that most beginners make. One mistake is turning the wrong nipple. In other words, trying to tighten or loosen the wrong spoke. It's easy to get confused if you constantly look at the nipples up here. You could pick this spoke when you meant to turn this spoke pretty easily, when you meant to tighten or loosen this spoke. The way to avoid that is, if you know that you're going to move the wheel, you're trying to move the wheel to this side, you want to turn a spoke on this side. And to find it, you can just check and make sure that that spoke that you want to turn is on this side of the hub, and then follow the spoke up to the rim, and then you'll be sure to turn the right spoke and tighten or loosen the one you want it to. That's one mistake. So you have to pay attention when you're truing the wheel. If you're not able to focus, then put it away and come back to it later when you can focus on what you're doing. And don't be in a hurry. Just be patient, take your time, enjoy the process. It can be frustrating at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's a lot of fun. The other common mistake people make is they turn the spoke nipple the wrong way. Instead of tightening, they loosen, or instead of loosening, they tighten. That's an easy mistake to make if you turn the nipple when it's at different positions on the wheel. But the way to think of it is, if you're looking from outside the rim down at the nipple, clockwise turns, turning to the right, just like any nut and bolt, tightens the spoke. Counterclockwise turns, loosen the spoke. So if you turn to the left, you loosen, turn to the right, you tighten. And if you're always thinking about the nipple as if you're looking down from the outside of the rim onto the top of the spoke, top of the nipple, you won't get it wrong. But you do have to think about it every now and then, and you might find yourself turning the nipple the wrong way and catch yourself, and that's okay. You just go back and turn it the other way. The good thing when you're truing the wheels, you can actually see what you're doing. You'll have an indicator showing. If you turn the spoke the wrong way, the rim will move the wrong way. And when you spin the wheel and check your results, you'll see that it's out. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to put the wheel in the truing stand, and I'm going to show you the wobble. But first, what we'll do is we'll fix side to side. That's lateral adjustments to get the wheel true and take out the wobble, the side to side wobble. And then what we'll do is we'll check for hops, up and down, deviations, roundness issues, and we'll fix those. Then that'll knock it out side to side again, so we'll check that, and then we'll go back to roundness again. And slowly but surely, we'll get it to where the wheel is where we like it. At that point, we'll tension the spokes and get all the spokes tight, because they need to be very tight in order to be able to ride the wheel and have it hold up out on the road. You can actually spend as much time as you want truing a wheel. You can go for absolutely perfect, so perfect that when you spin the wheel you can't see any side-to-side deviation or any up and down. But you don't need to go that perfect either. It only needs to be perfect enough to ride down the road, stay straight, and operate within the brakes. If you're using caliper brakes on the rim, it needs to be better than if you're using disc brakes at the hub. But still, even if it was slightly out of true, like a couple millimeters one way or the other, slightly out of round, you'd never feel it riding down the road. But ideally, you try to get it as good as you can get it by eye, and at that point, you can stop, ride it, see how it does. You'll know pretty quick if the wheel is good, if you finish the job or not, because a wheel that isn't tight will tend to loosen and you'll go out of true when you're riding the bike. If that happens though, with the skills that you've developed practicing your truing and tensioning, you learn how to true it more quickly, and then you learn how to get it tight enough so it doesn't come out of true. If a wheel is coming out of true, the spokes just need to be tighter. It's almost impossible to get the spokes too tight. So when you tension the wheel, get it good and tight. It should be difficult to turn the spoke nipples. Now we're going to talk about more of this as I go along and show you how it's done. The two things you fix when you're truing a wheel is side to side, or wobble, or lateral, and up and down, which is roundness or vertical, or sometimes they call it hop. For side to side wobbles, you're working with the spokes on either side of the rim. So it's pretty easy to think about it. If you wanted to move the rim in this direction, you can tighten the spokes on this side and loosen the spokes on this side, and the rim will move in this direction. Vice versa if you want to go in that direction. So that's how you take out side to side wobbles. If it's a short wobble, just over 3 or 4 spokes, you just work with 3 or 4 spokes. If it's a big one, you would work with more spokes. And slowly the rim will move right over and get nice and round. It can take a lot of time if there are a lot of wobbles, but basically you work on one wobble at a time until the whole rim is nice side to side, nice and true. Now when you're working on up and down, it's a different process. When you work on up and down, or what you could call hops, like an egg shape, you find the high spots and you tighten the spokes. You don't worry about side to side too much, you just worry about removing the egg shape. So if the rim has a high spot right here, all I need to do is tighten the spokes right there, and it'll pull the rim down. At the same time it pulls the rim down, it pushes the rim out in other areas where it has the ability to move because the spokes aren't very tight there. So we're going to do these steps on the wheel in the truing stand so you can see the rim. Hopefully you'll be able to see how it changes adjustment as I make these adjustments with the spoke nipples. It's fun. I think you'll enjoy it as you get the hang of it and become good at it without too much practice. I'm going to true intention our just built wheel in a truing stand because truing stand has these nice indicators down here on either side of the rim, and I can come down here and get real close, and you should be able to see what I'm working on with the spokes and the indicators and see the changes in the side to side and the up and down the rim as we true. But if you don't have a truing stand, you could also put the wheel in the frame of the bicycle you're actually building the wheel for. You can see what I've done here is pretty simple. I just put the seat on the edge of the garage door, which lifts the rear wheel off the ground and holds it there. And then I can sit here and spin the wheel and make adjustments. Use the frame of the bicycle. It works just like a truing stand. I can use the brake blocks as indicators to watch side to side and up and down in the rim and make adjustments with the spokes. And one of the advantages here is that when you're working on a wheel in the bike frame, you can center it to the frame. You don't need special tools. You'll see when I show you truing in the wheel truing stand that there's a special tool called a dishing gauge I use, and there's another way to do it if you don't have a dishing gauge. But if you work in the frame, you can center it to the frame of your bike as you're truing and rounding the wheel, which is a nice way to do it. If you don't have a garage door, you could put the bike in a trainer. That's another way to get the rear wheel off the ground. And for the front wheel, of course, you could just raise the bike higher up to get the front wheel off the ground if you're building a front wheel. So I've got the wheel in the truing stand. I'm going to come in tight with the camera so that you can see what we're doing. First, we'll start with the side-to-side truing. For that, you use these two indicators and you position them up and down until you have them right next to the rim. Now when you spin the wheel, you can see the wobbles in the wheel. Remember, this is a brand new wheel. Spokes are kind of loose, well, very loose still. And we don't expect it to be perfect after we just laced it up. So right now I'm going to work on fixing the side-to-side wobble. You can see that it's coming over and hitting the right indicator. So if I want to move it away from that indicator, you loosen the spokes on the right-hand side and you tighten the spokes on the left-hand side. So we'll start with this first wobble. There aren't very many wobbles in this rim, so we'll start with the first one. Go back here. There it's rubbing. Now if I loosen this spoke, which is on this side of the hub, tighten the nipple half a turn at a time, and I give it a spin, that slight adjustment right there completely fixed the problem. So now we'll bring the caliper a little closer and we find the next wobble. If the wheel was perfectly centered in this truing stand, it would be right between the two indicators. So I know that because it's rubbing here, it needs to move this way a little bit. So again, I'm going to loosen the spokes on this side of the rim, and I'm going to tighten the spoke on the other side. I actually loosened two on this side, I tightened one on this side. Let's see what effect it had. Much better. So now we can bring the indicator in. See how it's getting smaller and smaller? Now we're going to tighten these spokes on the left side a little bit in half-turn increments. Loosen this side a little bit. Look again. As you tighten in one spot, make adjustments and change it in one spot, it's common for the wobble to move. So sometimes you have to chase it around the rim a little bit. So again, I'm loosening spokes on the right, tightening spokes on the left over the section of the wobble. You can see that it's what I said, a trial and error process. You go little by little, use your indicator, and keep improving it. As it gets closer to straight, you often have to make a lot of little adjustments where you're moving a lot of little wobbles. You know, it tends to get, as it gets closer to perfect, it can seem like it's harder to true. But it's not really harder, it's just that you have to look more closely to see the wobbles and make slighter adjustments, go more gradually. Now we've got it almost centered because we tightened those other spokes, made the adjustments that we made, we knocked it out the other way. So we go to that section, and now we're going to loosen the spoke on the left, tighten the spoke on the right. 2 spokes. See how we did. It's getting better. You just have to take your time, make small adjustments, check what's happening, and you'll keep getting better and better. When you have it side to side, pretty close, you're pretty happy with how it is, then it's time to check up and down because the two influence each other. The true for roundness, to adjust the vertical on the wheel, you move the indicators, the caliper down below the rim because we're going to sight the gap between the bottom of the rim and the tip of the indicator, the calipers here. So if we bring them together like this and look at this gap right here, and we give the wheel a spin, you should be able to see that it's got a hop, a high spot. As I bring the caliper in, it becomes more apparent. See how it hits on every revolution? So the wheel actually is not round. It has a high spot in it. So our job is to remove that high spot. So to do that, we find that, we stop it at the caliper where it's hitting, and then we tighten the spokes in this area, which pulls that part of the rim up. It's hitting right here, so let's try half a turn, half a turn, half a turn, give it a spin. Already, it's a little better, so let's get it back to hitting. There, it's still hitting. Another half a turn tighter, half a turn tighter, half a turn tighter. Now, if you didn't have a truing stand and you're working in your bike frame, like I showed, you'll have a brake caliper on either side of the rim, And you can actually put a pencil across the brake blocks and create this line that you sight to for finding hop. It's getting a little better each time. It's still rubbing a little bit. It moved a little bit. It was over here, and now it's moved over here. Half a turn, quarter turn maybe, half a turn. Let's try it again. Remember I said you chase it around? But we're getting closer with each little adjustment. We just take our time. Notice that all I've done is tighten spokes. You don't have to worry about left and right spokes. You're tightening each spoke. Another situation you can run into when you're rounding a wheel is you can have a dip in the wheel. You see how the wheel comes around and there's actually a low spot in the wheel. Usually you're working with the high spots because as a new wheel just being laced up, the spokes are all relatively loose. But sometimes there might be a bad part of the rim that's a little low. Like on this rim, you can see that low spot that's coming around. To fix this is actually kind of fun, and it's just a matter of finding that low spot and looking at it and figuring out, well, how wide is it? How many spokes does it span? So in this case, the low spot is close to the valve stem hole. You can't see that. We can kind of see it. And it's worst over about 4 spokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. To get this out of there, what we're going to do is we're going to loosen those 4 spokes. Now we know that this wheel has 28 spokes in it. So if I loosen those 4 spokes, this part of the rim will go down once I tighten the other 24 spokes around the rim. So let's give that a try. We'll come back to that spot. We'll loosen these. The low spot's pretty big. And I can feel this nipple is really tight here. Sometimes I am doing it a half a turn at a time to try to feel how loose the spoke is. These two weren't that tight, so it was mainly these two here. So let's give it a spin and see if just loosening helped it. It did. We still have a little low spot still here. So let's go around, see if we can't bring that out. To do it, I'm just going to go around and tighten all the way around, 24 spokes, till we get back to that low spot again. By tightening these spokes, I'm pulling down on the rim, all around the rim. Because I pull down on the rim, all around the rim, it forces the rim to pop out at that low spot. About halfway around now. Just doing a half turn at a time. Keep going, almost there. Now we're back to the area we were working on before. Let's see how we did. So that's a technique for getting a low spot out. So now you know how to get the high spots out and the low spots out. I think it's one of the funner parts of truing. When you can get a wheel perfectly round, there's a lot of satisfaction in that. And it's not hard to do. It just takes a little time and patience. Just keep going until it's as round as you want to get it. You can get it so round, most rims anyway, you can get so round that when you spin the wheel you can't see any deviation by eye, which is a very satisfying thing. Get to this point, you go back and work on side to side again, and then you continue. You come back, you work on round again, and you keep going until you're really happy with both. Side to side is where you like it, and roundness is where you like it. When you're satisfied with how true you've got it side to side and up and down, and you're pretty happy, you want to check centering. The centering of the rim over the hub. That makes sure that when you put the wheel in the frame, it'll be centered in the frame and not off to one side or the other. Some truing stands, like this Park truing stand, automatically shows me where center is, so I just true to the indicators, the caliper on the truing stand. If you have a truing stand that doesn't do that, a trick is to simply flip the wheel in the truing stand and just check one side. You look at the caliper, the indicator next to the rim, and if the same distance between the tip of the indicator and the rim, whether it's put in this way or this way, then you know that the rim is centered. That's a quick way to do it. There are also tools called dishing gauges, which is a tool that provides 3 points. There's a point in the center, and each end is a foot. So you put this tool on the rim and you adjust the center foot. See how I've adjusted it? And now the two ends are not touching. And you adjust it so that all 3 points touch on this side. And if the wheel is perfectly centered, all 3 points will touch on this side and this side. If you have a situation where there's a big gap on one side and it's touching on the other side, it tells you that the rim needs to move halfway in between. So a dishing tool is a nice way to go, but you don't need it. If you have a truing stand, you can flip the wheel around, and if you're working in the frame of your bicycle, you can go by the stays, the tubes on the bicycle, and center it between them, and that'll work fine too. You want to check centering after each step, and you definitely want to check when you think you're all done with the wheel as one final last step, because you don't want to end up with a wheel that's too close to one side of the frame or the other. When you check for centering, if you find that the wheel is off center, out of position, not right in the middle, then what you need to do is move the rim in the direction it needs to go. You do that by working on only one side of the spokes. So you go to the valve stem hole, start there so you know where you started, and then if you wanted to move the rim this direction, go around and turn all these nipples, every nipple on the right side, the same distance. A quarter turn if you want to move it a tiny bit, half turn if you want to move it a little more. Then you check the centering and keep doing that until you get the rim right where you want it. Another important step when building a wheel is to what they call stress relieve, which is to put a little pressure on the spokes, sort of simulate what's going to happen when you ride the wheel down the road. And that seats the nipples in the rim, and it seats the spokes in the hub, and it takes any stress out. As you tighten the nipples, things get wound up, and by squeezing, stress relieving, what I'll show you, just makes the wheel settle in, and means that when it's all done and you're out riding, you're much less likely to have problems with it going out of true. To do that, you just use your hands. I bring spin the rim around until the valve stem hole is in front of me, and then put my left hand on the parallel spokes, my right hand on the parallel spokes on the right, and then I squeeze with authority. Might not look like I'm squeezing very hard, but I am actually pulling pretty hard on the spokes trying to seat them, and if they're not seated correctly, the pressure will pull them into place. And if any of the spokes are wound or the nipples are wound, it will help them relax. I go around the rim squeezing parallel pairs of spokes. Until I'm back at the valve stem hole. And I'll do that maybe 3 times in the course of a wheel build. Definitely at the end, just to make sure that all the stress is out of the wheel. The final step of your wheel build is tensioning the wheel. I've spoken about this a couple of times and how important it is to get the spokes uniformly tight so that the wheel holds up when you're out riding it. To tension the wheel at this point, just to go over what we've accomplished, the wheel is as true as we can get it side to side, it's as round as we can get it up and down, and it's centered. Now what we're going to do is we're going to uniformly tighten the spokes little by little and not lose the true or the up and down, and keep it on center too. To do that is sort of a precision process. It's not difficult, but you want to pay attention to what you're doing. And what you do is you start at the valve stem hole again, and you go around the rim, turning each nipple 1/2 turn at a time, just a 1/2 turn at a time. You go around the wheel doing that. You do it once, and then you check. You see if it came out of true, you see if it came out of round, and you make sure it's centered, still centered. If anything changed, fine tune it. Stress relieve gently on the spokes, then go around, start back at the valve stem, 1/2 turn at a time, all the way around again. You'll have to do this approximately 6 to 8 times, depending on how tight your spokes were when you finished truing and rounding and centering the wheel. Sometimes it'll be fairly tight, but when you get done with the tensioning, the spokes should be very tight. Now, if you're not sure how tight is right, go to another bicycle you have of the same type that the wheel you're building has on it, and then squeeze the spokes on that with your hands, like when you stress relieve the wheel you're building. Feel the spokes on the wheel you have and compare it to the wheel that you're building. And you can get a feel for it. You can also pluck the spokes and listen to the tone that they make, and then compare. The tight wheel on a bike that's riding well and the wheels are good, your wheel wants to be as tight as those spokes. So this takes a little practice and a little experience, but you can get it high enough tension to ride it no problem. And remember, if the wheel is going out of true when you're actually riding your new wheel, you just get it tighter again. Well, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, good job. Hopefully you now have the skills and the knowledge to take a crack at building wheels. And maybe you'll end up becoming a wheel building fool like yours truly. It's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying. And when you can build your own wheels, if you do decide to go on a long trip on a bicycle, a broken wheel or a bent rim won't slow you down. You'll just get the parts you need and you can fix it on the road, which is, or you can help your friend if somebody's riding or you have a friend with a bike. So it's a great skill to have. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that if you get stuck or you have a question or you want some help, if you leave me a comment, I'll reply back and help you out with however I can. Just remember that it's a fun process. It takes a little practice to master. Take your time, learn from your mistakes, be patient about it, and good luck.